As he did, his fingers touched something slick and cold, and he snatched his hand away, falling back in disgust. The lower part of George Haynes' face had been tightly bound with wide, clear, adhesive tape. It was then the runner realized that his neighbor had not met with an accident, but something far nastier. He scrambled back through the gate and out onto the road where, crouching in the gutter, he pulled his mobile from his pocket and called the police. The farmhouse was ablaze with lights. House lights, powerful police mobile lights, and blue flashing ones. Their shimmering rays danced across the darkened fenland and made the rural setting look uncanny. "That's the chap who found him." The older policeman pointed to the sweaty young man leaning against the side of the squad car. He was draped in a blanket and still wore the disbelieving, slack-mouthed expression that accompanies severe shock. "Poor sod," murmured his colleague, "but at least he didn't go inside. One day I'll be very thankful for that." "Unlike us." The detective inspector raised his eyebrows and gave his sergeant a resigned half-smile. He had hoped to reach the end of his service without seeing something like this again. He knew from experience that it would stay with him long into his dotage, and part of him felt cheated that he was to finish his career with such a harrowing investigation. "Before we go in, tell me what the doctor said about this victim here." He nodded towards the body that lay close to the inside of the gates. The sergeant drew in a breath and repeated word for word what he had been told. His voice was a monotone, as if he were reading the information off, and the inspector knew that the officer was simply trying to keep his emotions at a distance. It didn't do to allow your feelings to interfere when you were dealing with a case like this. A case like this. The inspector was pretty sure that other than him, no one in attendance had ever seen anything like this before. They were country coppers. They had had their fair share of most kinds of crime, and maybe a little more than their fair share of fatal traffic collisions on the fast straight roads, but deliberate, cold-blooded murder was not a common occurrence in the misty fens. "The doc reckons that George Haynes drove his tractor into the yard and switched off the engine. Climbed down from the cab with his back to whoever attacked him. His assailant hit him across the back of the legs just above the heel, with a heavy bladed weapon, possibly an axe. But from the angle of the wounds, more likely a machete-style knife." The inspector had an immediate picture of the harvesters in the fields, wielding those wicked knives, slicing easily through the thick hard stems of cauliflowers and cabbages and placing them in the cups on the conveyor. "Doc says it would have totally disabled him. The 2 blows severed both his Achilles tendons. They would have contracted up his legs like snapped roller blinds. He would have been in excruciating agony and unable to do anything." They looked together at a long double-tracked bloody stain that led from the tractor to the gate. "Except to drag himself away and bleed to death," added the sergeant. He swallowed hard. "And he couldn't cry for help because our killer had wrapped packing tape around his mouth." "One thing was for sure. He crawled away from the house, so it's most likely that our victim knew his attacker had gone inside." The sergeant looked towards the farmhouse, then back to his boss. "Time to check it out, I guess." The inspector nodded and they moved together towards the open front door. They found Lydia Haynes in the kitchen. It was warm, friendly, and smelled of herbs, homemade bread, ground coffee, and fresh blood. When Control had rung them, they had been warned that it had been a frenzied attack and to prepare themselves. The fact that they had been reminded about the counselling services available to them had spoken volumes. That was something that generally came after the event, not before it. "Sweet Jesus, that gives frenzied a whole new meaning," said the sergeant. The hollowness in his voice was not lost on his boss. "Just try to take in the whole scene, son. Not just the victim. We need to know who and why, and we need to know quickly. We can't allow whoever did this to stay free for long." He looked around and saw a white-faced uniformed officer standing in the doorway. "You're the local Bobby Constable?"
"Yes, sir. I took the call, first on the scene."
He paused.